Hi, this is the Stick Figure Historian. And what episode are we on now? Oh yeah, welcome to episode 16 of the American series. Last time, William Coddington jetted off to England to get his own charter for the island of Aquidneck and Canonicut, because he and several of the other men there didn't want to be linked with Roger Williams' colony of Providence. But, William Coddington's new charter didn't quell the strife either. Some of the men in Newport and Portsmouth had been happy about their union with Providence and Warwick, and had come to accept it. They could vote on their laws and vote for who they wished to be governor. But now, this way, Coddington would make all the rules. And these men didn't like the idea of being forever ruled by Coddington. The Baptist pastor, John Clarke, was of this view, and a friend of his named William Dyer, who is actually, interestingly, by the way, the husband of the famous Quaker woman, Mary Dyer, who would later be executed for her faith in Massachusetts. Roger Williams was, of course, also very upset about what Coddington had done, especially since Coddington was trying to make an alliance with Massachusetts and Connecticut now, the very thing Roger had just tried to avoid. Within a few months of hearing this news, Roger was back on the Atlantic again, this time with both Clarke and Dyer at his side. They had to stop Coddington at all costs. And indeed, this mission had cost Roger much. In order to pay for ship passage and the expenses he would have in England, he had been forced to sell his trading post, the only way he was making money to support his family. How they survived while he was away, I don't know. Surely their friends and neighbors must have helped them, but times must have been tough. That civil war which had caused so much suffering in England had just barely ended when Roger and his two friends stepped foot in London. The king, Charles I, had been, got rid of, so to speak. All the power officially rested with Parliament now, and everyone must obey, whether they liked it or not. Nonetheless, it was still a rather tumultuous time, and only by great patience could the three men expect to get another charter to overrule Coddington's. Roger's politician friends and relations, Cromwell and young Sir Henry Vane in particular, did all they could to assist him. And eventually, in 1652, the first great step was taken. You might recall, when I spoke of the early history of Portsmouth, that Coddington was able to pay for the purchase of the land there because he was a wealthy merchant. Well, it was this business of his that proved his undoing. Somehow, Roger's friends in Parliament were able to come up with a way that they could accuse Coddington of making money by trading with the Dutch. Since England was at war with the Dutch, that would immediately make Coddington a traitor to his country. And since no traitor can hold a government office, his charter was immediately taken away. Now, whether Coddington was actually guilty of trading with the Dutch or not, I can't say. I don't know for sure. But in any case, it proved a fast and convenient excuse to get him out of the way. As I said, however, this was only the first step in the process. Now another charter must be made up for Providence plantations in Rhode Island. Month after month dragged on, and still no progress was made. The unrest and strife in Parliament had flared up again, and Cromwell wasn't happy with how things were going. One day, he finally had enough. He brought a body of troops into Westminster Hall where Parliament was meeting and forced them to close down. From then on, he ruled England almost entirely by himself, under the grand title of Lord Protector, which basically is a great name to disguise the fact that you're really king. Because that's really what he was for all intents and purposes. People even addressed him as Your Majesty in several cases. Besides, I think the king look really suits him. Oh, but you know what might look even better? There we go. Anyway, point is, England's going through another micro-revolution. And besides this, there were troubles in Ireland, Scotland, and the war with the Dutch to confound everything as well. Nobody really had much time for the little governor of Providence plantations and his problems. Now it was 1653, 2 years after Roger had arrived in England. And here he was still. He was practically sick with longing for home. He wrote to Mary, asking her if she would take the children and come live in England until matters were settled. No doubt Mary wished to see her husband, but one Atlantic voyage was enough for her. She wouldn't come. In 1654, Roger decided he couldn't bear it anymore. He left John Clarke behind to finish the work of getting the charter, and struck out west across the waves. He was finally going home. He found his family safe and well, but the colony was in a bit of a tangle. There was a lot of bickering about various things, and many people were murmuring against him. Some even concocted lies about his character. It took a while to get things straightened out, but eventually harmony was restored, insomuch that Roger was elected president that same year. He held this position of president for 3 years, until he retired, worn and weary with the heavy strains of leadership. From now on, his involvement would be a quiet, background participation. He could turn his focus to his family and to his writing. As for Clarke, he remained faithfully at his post in England. For 9 more years he waited. 9 years of constant change and revolution. Cromwell died, and his son Richard fumbled with the massive responsibilities of Lord Protector, until at last Charles II took again his father's throne. And it was the new king who finally granted the wish of the doctor from Newport. Rhode Island and Providence plantations received an official royal charter in 1663. Rhode Island fulfilled wholly the hopes and dreams of its founder. Jews, Quakers, and persecuted groups from all over America and Europe came to its welcoming shores for shelter, the one place in the world where a man could enjoy sole liberty. Through the coming years, it suffered and sustained both internal strife and the ravages of an Indian war, during which much of Providence itself and Roger Williams' house were burned to the ground. But still, Rhode Island stood, too strong to conquer. Roger died in peace at the age of 79. His example of liberty would outlive him, going on to become an integral stone in the foundation of a new nation, America. And yet, we must remember that Roger was far from perfect, nor was he always consistent. I've already told you about his shameful involvement in the enslaving of the Pequot Indians after the terrible war with them. And he wasn't always kind to his Christian brethren either. Perhaps you might remember my mention of his ended friendships with William Harris and John Smith. And yes, that's William Harris, not Thomas. I screwed that up in that episode. In Harris's case, a dispute arose between him and Roger about the extent of liberty a person should have. Harris thought that men shouldn't have to obey the government at all. Roger said this was unbounded license. He thought that men must obey the government in all matters that weren't related to religion. That was the first of the tensions between them. But things only became worse when Harris wrote a book that Roger very much hated. Roger went so far as to officially charge Harris with treason. This was in those days when Roger was president in 1657. His official accusation was that Harris's book contained dangerous writings containing his notorious defiance to the authority of the Lord Protector, and that he was encouraging people to renounce their allegiance to the Commonwealth of England. Thankfully for Harris, the whole ordeal came to nothing, and he was declared innocent. But the incident still stands as a blot to Roger's character and his abuse of power as president. Secondly arises the story of Roger's relations with John Smith. Less is known regarding the contentions between them, but Roger clearly grew to dislike him. He wrote a letter to John Winthrop mentioning he didn't like the fact that Smith had called the members of the Massachusetts General Court devils. Which, kind of fitting, but anyway. And it's strange that Smith never actually ever became a free man of the colony, which means he never had voting rights. Perhaps Smith was a more forceful, outspoken man, and Roger didn't care for his more fiery approach. But still, this too remains a sad reality in the life story of one who spoke so much of liberty. And then there was the case of Roger's little brother, Robert, who eventually came to settle in Rhode Island. You see, when Roger formed a militia for the colony, he put it into law that every man of a certain age must serve his turn in it. And, well, Robert was kinda upset about this. He argued with Roger and said that he had no right to make people serve in the militia. What if people didn't want to bear weapons? What if that was against their conscience? But Roger wouldn't listen to his little brother. He replied with a lengthy analogy regarding a ship's crew and a captain. A captain must have the full control of his crew in order for a voyage to go well, he said. As president, he was a sort of captain, and the men under him must obey him for their own benefit. This, perhaps, is the saddest example of Roger's duplicity. We can respect his ideas of soul liberty, but we must remember that he was a man, and men do not often practice the things they say they believe. Oh, and one more thing. You've probably seen this monument of him before. It's in practically every book or web article that talks about the guy. But have you ever seen the bottom part? Check this out. If we go down here, what is that? So, I went looking up about it. Well, apparently that lady thing is supposed to be Cleo, the muse of history, and she's inscribing Roger's name into the plaque there at the bottom. Obviously the guy didn't have any part in erecting his own memorial, so he couldn't have put her there, but still, I just think it's kinda spooky. Anyhow, if you're interested in learning more about American history, and Baptist American history in particular, check out the book America in Crimson Red by James Beller. It's a great resource to get started with, and though I disagree with the author in several respects, I would still highly recommend it. Anyway, that's enough about all that for now. Next week, we're going to find out what happens when you take a bunch of Scots-Irish backcountry settlers, money-minded politicians with big impressive names, ultra-wealthy, opportunistic businessmen, national debt, and a tax on distilled liquor, and mix them all together. Well, You can probably pretty much guess the outcome.